As Your Heart Betrays You, Part 22. A Miraculous Ladybug Fanfiction written and narrated by Mira. Artwork for the opening and thumbnail image by EvenArt Adam on Instagram and Tumblr. You can find EvenArt Adam linked in the description box, and if you haven't heard the previous 21 parts of the story, they are also linked in the description box. If you haven't already, don't forget to smash that like button so Plaid gets his cheese and leave a comment for the YouTube algorithm. If you aren't sure what to comment, put nothing more. Please enjoy As Your Heart Betrays You, Part 22. Marinette Dupang Chang as Ladybug, 21 years old. Adrien stepped forward, placing his forehead in the crevice between Ladybug's neck and shoulder, and she could feel his breath on her collarbone. That was close. Too close. If he'd moved a few centimeters to his right, she would have kissed him, burning and passionate, and a juxtaposition to the night's cool breeze. Even a mask wouldn't hide her burning cheeks. Could he tell? Could he tell how she ached for him? Could he tell she wanted him too? How she'd always wanted him and hid it behind smiles and a broken heart? I think, she began, reaching up to finger-comb his hair. I think the party's dying down. When he didn't respond, she just held him. They stayed like that for a few minutes, but strangely, she didn't feel uncomfortable. It was like finding a stuffed animal from childhood and holding on to it for an afternoon. You realize you're too old to do this, and it's not quite rational, but you do it anyway. What's the harm, right? But Adrien wasn't a stuffed toy. He was a human being. More than that, he was an Agrest. He was Adrien Agrest. And yet she didn't want to be the one to pull away first. Ladybug couldn't be the one to pull away first. But she was proof of the impossible. And so, with impossible inner strength, she stepped away, leaving the Agrest man to cover his face with his hands instead of her collarbone. Sorry, Adrien said. Thanks. Need a few to collect yourself? Yeah, thanks. I'll be inside. Okay. She didn't allow herself to steal a glance as she crossed in front of him. What was that just now? Better not dwell on it. Whatever it was, she'd leave it on this balcony. Whew. Nothing like a moment of heat to cook up clarity. How had she been so emotionally muddled all night? She didn't want a relationship with anyone, much less Adrien. It'd be hard to say yes to Cat Noir if he wanted one, despite her feelings for him. She didn't need a partner in her daily life. She didn't want a partner in her daily life. Her 5-year plans had nothing to do with pretty boys and champagne parties. The rest of the night proved uneventful, a cool juxtaposition to the heat she left on the balcony. After he'd composed himself, Adrien proved to be the perfect escort gentleman rumors painted him to be, to the point it was almost infuriating. But whatever. It meant she had someone to call up when she needed a man on her arm, because Cat Noir certainly didn't attend events like these. Besides, with Adrien's elbow wrapped around hers, Ladybug found the people approaching her to be delightful instead of those who would try to work an angle into conversation. Here's good. He'd escorted her out into the car, letting the driver trail them around downtown aimlessly until she pointed out a restaurant. Oh, sure. Adrien got out first after they came to a stop, circling around to get her door. For a moment, it was like nostalgic intimacy. He didn't lead her into the restaurant, but into the alley where she'd slip away anyway when he left her. Thanks for tonight, she said. Yeah, it was the lack of lighting that made this feel so intimate, not the setting itself. When's the last time she was in a stinky alley with her charming man anyway? Cat didn't count, of course. I take it you won't allow me to walk you home? She laughed. He was using his magazine cover face on her. She and Alia sat and labeled all the faces he made in various talk shows and movies a few years back, and if she were a girl in a movie, she'd have no choice but to say yes, American straight teeth and all. Curse these little flutters. He was the right person to have the butterfly miraculous after all. And let you figure out my secret identity? In this economy? She expected banter, or at least a laugh, but he instead pursed his lips. Right. He looked at the ground, then back at her as he sighed. And if I knew who you were? The flutter in her chest rippled the wave of panic washing over her. If you knew who I am, she began, you wouldn't have gone on this date with me. Ladybug hadn't expected the look of shock on his face. Surprised, sure, but the color drained so quickly you'd think someone told him Hawkmoth was back. Adrien looked away, covering his mouth as he cleared his throat, then looked back with a smirk. It wasn't as sharp as his usual rebuttal. So, this is a date, huh? And just like the corners of his mouth, his voice betrayed him. It wasn't a joke. He'd barely choked it out. Hopelessly in love with her. What did tonight mean to him? Why had tonight meant anything to him? I can't date you, Adrien. This had to end here, butterflies or not. But even the expression he modeled for her couldn't mask the emotion in his eyes. Why? It was so soft, so emotional. It shouldn't be like this. How had he become so attached to her in just a night? You know why, Ladybug said, trying to keep her voice even. I will be anything you want, anyone you want, just please, please. His breath shook as he pulled his fingers to his face, the air he blew between them a sentence in and of itself. His smirk looked like a grimace now. Choose me. This had to end, both for his sake and hers. She knew better than to play with him, or with anyone when her heart was too muddled to navigate. Adrien was so gentle when he let Marinette down years ago, but she didn't have that luxury. She'd have to break his heart, and hers along with it. I did that once. The words tasted foul in her mouth, and her throat closed like she was allergic to them. And you broke my heart. That was it. The final blow. The model boy had nothing to pose for, his expression falling like her heart in her chest. I know. It took the air out of her lungs. And I'm sorry. Her jaw tightened. He knew? Since when? And how? Who had... Cat Noir. Oh, this was a betrayal she never saw coming. Cat Noir told him they'd dated. Did he tell him her identity too? No, he wouldn't do that. But she never thought he'd tell Adrien one of the girls he dated was Ladybug. How could he be so reckless? All her sorrow evaporated into anger, boiling and hot, a flashpoint that licked her conscience clean as it steamed her cheeks red. I think you should go. It wasn't the tone of a girl shy in front of her ex. It was the sound of a woman who bottled up anger for years and knew she had to continue her charade of keeping it together. If he were Cat Noir, he'd still make an offer to take her home, even if she were mad at him. But he wasn't Cat. He was Adrien, the guy who broke her heart on a Tuesday like it was just another week, and then did the same thing to another one 3 weeks later. The only thing that made Marinette special was that she was the product launch of his date and dump cycle. Wait, no. He reached for her wrist, then stopped himself. Good. Please, wait. Thank you for the lovely night. She turned her back to him, grabbing her yo-yo. I love you. Ladybug all but dropped her escape route, the thread twisting between her fingers as she tried to unwind what he said. Excuse me? She spun on her heel, as close to livid as she'd ever been in an alleyway. This is how this man responded to rejection? I mean, I think I can. Love you. I can love you. I can love you. This certainly wasn't what she had planned for herself, emotionally speaking, but it was like every moment she spent yelling at her screen and booing love interests over the last few years was practice for right now. Adrien wasn't just Adrien right now. He was every male lead she'd ever rolled her eyes at, and she was ready to spit. I can't trust you. And I especially can't trust that. She could feel the hurricane in her chest, wetting her insides as a primer for violent rain that would overcome her and her makeup as soon as they parted ways. After all, underneath her anger was a girl who heard her long-standing person tell her he loved her. But I can, and I will. This time I'll be what you want. I won't leave you alone. Who was this man? That's not what I want. Time for the final blow. And really, Adrien, when have you ever been anything but what you thought other people wanted? The appetizers they shared on the way in lapped at the back of her throat. Marinette, And then he froze. He froze, and she froze, and the world was suddenly him and her, separated by a mask that she may as well not be wearing. He knew. Adrien knew. And so, with her identity revealed for the second time this month, Ladybug turned to the only reasonable reaction in her arsenal of thoughts. She ran away. Ladybug took off, heels clacking so loud she forgot she could have zipped away instead of choosing to leave him with this version of her escaping like a child hiding from medicine. She knew she'd have to face it. But what if taking a nap would make it all better? What if she spent an afternoon rewatching Disney's Cinderella 3 times in a row and drinking soup? What if she never spoke to him again? Never tasted the bitterness of the pill that was hers to swallow? Would it be all right? Would she be all right? It was just a date. It wasn't supposed to be anything more. It was just a night off. It wasn't supposed to be anything more. Unable to breathe, Ladybug detransformed and broke down, rolled into a ball next to a stranger's garbage. Unable to breathe, the magic of the night washed away under her lashes. Unable to breathe, Marinette Dupang Chang wept. Thank you so much for listening. Part 23 is on the way. In the meantime, you can check out these other videos for more Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!